I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, LDS Hospital. I'm a twin. I was born first. My twin brother was born 10 or 15 minutes later. Yes, we were identical. Our parents couldn't tell us apart. There's a lot of people don't believe that, but we already had 7, 8 siblings before we came along. So that may have contributed to the fact that they had trouble keeping our names straight. But our navels were a little different, so they could tell us apart with our navels. If they wanted to know who we are, they'd say, "Pull up your shirt." And so we'd do that. But
where did you live at the time? In Salt Lake?
Salt Lake, Murray, near Granite High, 50s, 35th South. I've got 7 brothers and 3 sisters. And 2 of my brothers have died. 1 sister has died. And
was there a big gap there? Were you the last?
I'm a little towards the end. There was 7 before me, and then 4 after me.
What's it like coming from a big family, at least in those early years?
Oh, it was very fun. It was I never was lonely. I enjoyed the company. There was always interesting things to do, people to talk with, people to play with, and it was an adventure. I've always felt sorry for people that were in very small families. And I don't remember any of my grandparents. My grandmother, my father's mother, lived a few years after I was around, but I don't remember ever seeing her. She died about 6, 7 years after I was born. Incidentally, my grandmother and my grandfather, my father's parents, are the last couple that were sealed in polygamy in the church. Last ones on the records of the church.
What were their names?
Edmund Richardson and Daisy Stout Richardson. And there might have been one after them, but they were one of the last couples that were married. And so my father was raised in polygamy.
Pioneers, they're part of your...
Oh yeah, they were pioneers. My father lived like a pioneer when the church was forced to stop polygamy. Some of them were allowed to continue if they left the country, and so the church set up some colonies in Mexico, and Colonia Juarez and Colonia Dublin, and so they were allowed to continue polygamy. The second manifesto in 1904 ended polygamy church-wide, worldwide. Before that time, it was allowed up in Canada, and Mexico didn't enforce any, if there were any laws. And so that was quite a distinction. So my father had 36 brothers and sisters, and I couldn't keep track of all my uncles and aunts. And my older brothers and sisters were like parents to me. I sometimes didn't worry about what my parents would think. I was worried more about what my older brothers and sisters would think. So I lived in fear of them. They were good. They were good and they were nice. I didn't want to disappoint them, so I was careful about the way I lived. I sometimes got into a little mischief. My twin brother and I broke some family rules, and we went out behind the barn and ate white bread and chocolate, and never got around to cigarettes, but our family had some rules against
white bread and chocolate?
White bread and chocolate and sugar and things like that. But we didn't worry about going to hell. We thought, this is so good. We got to do this. We were also just lived shortly after the Depression. And since the Depression had affected the whole country in such a serious way, my father determined not to go into debt. So he never went into debt for a house. We were able to get some barracks that had been used by the government in Kearns, and also he got some from Delta at a place called near Delta, in a place called Topaz, where they had interned the Japanese, rounded them up and put them in these camps in different places, parts of the country. So I grew up in one of these barracks and didn't have indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse and pots, and we had a hose that came into the house for water, and we had a coal-burning stove, and we had heated our water on the stove, and it was fun though. It was I don't want to make it sound like it was tragic. It was cozy. It was fun. We didn't have a refrigerator for many years. Later on, we got one, and we didn't have a TV. Of course, they didn't have hardly any. Nobody had very many TVs. I think in about '58 we got our first TV, and it was black and white, and so it was. In some ways, it was difficult compared to our standards nowadays, but I enjoyed my youth and enjoyed my childhood. We didn't have air conditioning, but I didn't miss it.
Well, you had nothing to compare it to.
No, we had nothing, no air conditioning in the houses or cars. A lot of our toys were handmade. We'd go out. We had a fairly big yard. We had an acre that we lived on, and we had a lot of fun entertaining ourselves. We would use sticks for pretend they were rifles or guns. I mean, we just came up with our own. Christmas was always fun. My parents, even though my parents didn't want to go in debt, they managed to have a nice Christmas for us, and we worked hard though. There were several years where we worked every day of the year except Sundays. My family was quite religious. We worked on holidays, Christmas included, doing this construction work. It was very difficult, but we enjoyed it. We made it fun by having contests to see who could do the most work in the shortest amount of time, and so we were always having fun.
When you say work, like what kind of chores and things did you
have?
We
milked cows. We had pigs. We had chickens for a while. We had a goat for a while. But the cows, we milked the cows, and we always had milk, raw milk. My mother would make whole wheat bread, and so we were quite healthy. I coveted other friends who had white bread, and like I say, it was taboo in our home. And
why exactly? Explain that one to me.
Well, my parents had read books on health. One particular book called A Word of Wisdom, which it was said to be by Elder John A. Widsoe, an apostle, but finding out that his wife wrote it, Leah Widsoe, and put his name on there as if it was an official church publication. But that my parents thought that we should follow that, and they followed it strictly. And so my twin brother and I had to sneak to whenever we took the sacrament. It always shook my faith, but I figured, well, it's been blessed, so maybe it's okay. We walked to school on 35th South, 39th South, and 50th East. We went to Lincoln Elementary, and it was a good experience. I always had trouble in math, and it was something that I couldn't grasp. I blame that on having a twin brother. I feel like the biologists say that twins were once the same cell, and split apart, and we're kind of clones of each other. But I think he got more brains than I did, although he has the same trouble in math as I do. But I eventually, when I entered the University of Utah, the math part of my entrance tests, I failed, and so they told me I had to take a remedial class in math. It was a dumbbell math, and so I took that, and I failed it, and didn't feel too bad because it was so low it didn't hurt my GPA. It wasn't even part of the university, so I took it again and eventually passed and got my math requirements out of the way, and went on to become a teacher in English and history. Granite Junior High, which was attached to Granite Senior High, and I didn't enjoy I enjoyed my family life, but I didn't enjoy my junior high or junior high years very much because we were quite poor, and we didn't. My parents didn't think we needed to spend a lot of money on nice clothes, and so I didn't think our clothes were that bad. But some kids may not have. They didn't ever tease us about what we wore, but I wore the same pair of pants all year, some years, and we might have washed them once or twice, whether it needed or not. But I didn't enjoy the other students as much as I enjoyed my family. I really enjoyed my brothers and sisters, and I'd look forward to going home and doing things with them, playing games, talking, visiting.
What did you aspire to in high school?
I didn't have any definite plans. I sometimes went from one thing to another. My twin brother would give me a bad time and say, "What do you decide you're going to go into this week?" And I thought about different things. And when I went to the university, I wasn't even sure. I was taking the general requirements, and then finally, at the last part of the generals, I decided to be a teacher. Growing up, I was always working with my parents, but my first job outside of away from the family was doing some landscaping with a landscape company, like a ditch digger, and I didn't like that. I worked at Boise Cascade. They had a company called Pembroke's where they sold office supplies, and I worked there for a while, and all of these other jobs that I didn't really like very much made me more determined to get into teaching, where I could work with people and not have to do hard physical work, and I was able to be out of the weather, bad, cold, hot weather, because in our construction work I was always getting hurt and falling and getting banged up, and teaching was much easier. What stood out the most is my interest in art. Since we didn't have computers and video games, I always had paper and pencil, and we would draw. My parents, growing up, we every Friday, almost without fail, my mother would take us to the movies. And every Saturday, without fail, my father would take us to go swimming to get ready for Sunday. And we would go to the old Wasatch Springs place in northern part of North Salt Lake. I think it's a child's museum now, but we looked forward to the weekly movie and the weekly swimming, and so we'd be clean for Sunday, and we had some entertainment. There were times when my mother would march us out when the movie turned out to be inappropriate, yeah, It was an adventure in many ways.
So you graduated from Granite High,
Yes.
and what then?
Then I took a quarter at the University of Utah, and I might say that I never failed a class never failed any of my classes in junior high or high school. Got some D minuses, which I was thankful for, and but I didn't do very well in math. What I'd do in my math class is, teacher thought I was listening. I would be sketching him every day. I learned how to improve my art skills by drawing him every day. He thought I was listening and taking notes, so I think he didn't have the heart to fail me because I was so intent on what I was doing. And at the end of the year, I knew how to draw, but I didn't know how to what to do with ABC and XYZ, as they talk about in algebra. So, but yes, I took a quarter at the University of Utah. 15 hours cost me a whopping $45, and thought that was a lot of money in those days, but it's of course since gone up. Then I went on my mission after that first quarter, went on a mission to New Zealand, and my twin brother went to the North New Zealand mission. The highlights, well, one thing, I wondered how it would be to be away from my twin brother. We were never more than an hour or two away from each other. We were very close. I might say that neither of us, I've heard people say that with twins, one twin wants to boss the other one, and we never had that. We got along as long as I did everything he said. No, not really. We really enjoyed, but I wondered how it would be. But since I had a companion, I didn't miss him. It turned out to be the happiest 2 years of my life. No, but after we got through with our missions, it was a wonderful reunion. We hugged and we laughed and we cried at the same time after the 2 years. We're really close to each other, always have been and still are.
There must be some good twin stories from your teenage years, though.
Yes.
Did you stay closely resembling? Did you dress alike? Did you ever pull off a few pranks?
They'd have what they called turnabout day or changeabout day, and a lot of the teachers were expecting people like us, twins, to change and switch classes, which we did, but they didn't really know that we had changed because we were so much alike. But I did fail a test for him,
That wasn't probably the plan, right?
No,
you were supposed to do better?
It was a surprise quiz, and he hadn't been planning on it. But yes, we went on a few dates before our mission, and I was terrified to call this girl I liked, so I asked him to call for me, and he called, and she said okay, and then we went on a few dates, and I would call for him because I didn't want the girl to think that I was some kind of a fiend.
Did it make it any easier when you would call for your brother? Because
yes.
If they were rejecting, they weren't rejecting you, they were rejecting your brother, right?
Right. That took all the fear out of it. And then on some of our double dates, we would switch in the middle of the date. They'd be walking ahead of us, and we would switch, and they didn't know. The girl didn't know, so we'd start with one and end up with the other. And I might say too that when we ended up after we got married, quite often when we would agree to come get together and do something, we would be dressed the same way, same color, same clothing. In fact, he ended up teaching at the same school I did, Union Middle School, and we came from different almost every day we were dressed exactly the same. And if he was wearing a white shirt tie, I was doing the same. We hadn't called ahead and planned it out. We just was funny the way it worked out.
So you come back from your mission. What happens there?
Oh, I was home for, didn't take me long to get back into dating. My wife, the girl who was now my wife, wrote to me while I was on my mission, and she waited for me. And when we, a few months after my mission, I proposed, and she accepted. And then a few months later, we were married, and married. We've been married for 51 years now. We did a lot of work. My parents, they had grown up with the understanding that an idle mind is a devil's workshop, and so they were very concerned that we keep busy, and we had to, a lot of the fun we had was stolen moments here and there, but and again, the work itself was fun. We would make games out of that, as I said. But they were very insistent that we keep working.
Talk to me just a little bit more about your parents. It sounds like your parents were very very orthodox in Mormonism, and
Yeah.
and that was a good thing.
Yeah, that was good. They my father, he didn't use a lot of force. One day, one of my brothers said, "I don't want to go to church," and he says, "Okay, we'll just leave you home." And we were backing out, and he came out crying, and so we let him come with us. But
that doesn't work for teenagers, by the way.
No. That's right. My father would get us together and say, "Now, which one of you kids is going to be the black sheep?" Most families have one of the kids that stray off, and he says, "Which?" And he'd go around and look at us, and we all said, "Not me, not me."